Now sometimes I don't want to crack your password account. Sometimes I just want to find out what it is. I just want you to give it to me. Well, if I can't crack it necessarily, let's say that the users did use a properly complex password, I could choose to just sniff that password. Because after all, it's going to take time and it's going to take effort, and my password guessing or my force and attacks on your passwords might alert somebody that there's some activity going on. So I might just go ahead and just record or sniff your credentials off the line. That way, whenever you log in, I record it. And later on, I can take and replay that back to whatever server, and then I can gain access through the system using your account or your credentials that you used earlier on. Again, I can use a tool such as LoftCrack to actually sniff these hashes as they go over the line, and it's just one of the many tools that can be used. I can also use tools such as Scoop LM. Basically, what this is designed to do is to capture your LM or your MTLM authentication exchange on your network. Once I capture this exchange, then I can go back and either analyze it or replay it later. And this supports Active Directory, NTLM over NetBIOS, TCP/IP, Telnet, IIS, which is HTTP, DCOM, and so on. So I can capture all kind of information by using this tool. Once I have captured this information, I can use a tool called SMB Relay. Now, SMB Relay is basically an SMB server that takes this information and then replays that. In other words, it can be used to do man-in-the-middle attacks. By using this tool, I receive the information and then relay it on to wherever. I can choose to alter that information if I want, or I can choose to just relay that information as it is. Now, really, this tool is most effective on NT4 or Windows 2000, but it can be a very effective tool to use whenever I'm trying to obtain this information. So if we look at the SMB man-in-the-middle scenario, basically I could take and create a fake account, in this case a fraudulent server, and that server could intercept this information between the victim client and the victim server. And then, as I said, I can go ahead and choose to alter that information and pass it on, or maybe just record that information and then pass it on for later activity. I can also redirect SMB logins to me. In other words, what I can do here is I can listen for people trying to do LM or SMB logon on the system. Once I find those, I can actually reroute those authentication techniques, or those I can reroute that request to me or to the hacker. What happens here then is basically I'm having them log on to me, and then I'm capturing their information this way. One of the ways that we can redirect with an SMB is to actually just send an email message and have an embedded hyperlink. Once that hyperlink is clicked on, the user will actually try to access my network. Well, with each request or with each access that user tries to send, they will automatically send me their credentials with that request. So this can be a very tricky way to get information back. So to revisit SMB replay attacks, basically I trick the client into giving me a connection or requesting a connection, and then I send that request back to the client computer, and I collect the challenge that he's going to send to me. Once I have his challenge, then I have what I need. I wait for the response. Once I get the response, I return that back to the client as its own response. Now, if they have SMB signing in place on the network, this will not work, because in each case, the client will be able to detect that the message is indeed not coming from who he thinks it's coming from, or the server that he believes he's logging on to. But still, this can be a very effective method of recording these type of logins and then using them to authenticate back to the system. So basically, the client starts out by saying, hey, I want to connect, so give me a connection. And the server says, well, that's okay, here you go. So the client says, okay, here's my challenge, in which case we send that exact same challenge right back to them. They'll go ahead then and generate a response, which I can record, and then fine, I send back the response to them. Now I have both the challenge and the response for that resource to access information on their network. Another tool that can be used is called SMB proxy. And basically this is kind of a hashing the hash tool, is the way it's referred to. What happens is you just go ahead and pass the hash that you have received from the client. You can authenticate to an NT4 or 2000 server only if you know the MD4 hash. So what you do is you actually record that information and then you mount the shares by using that hash and access their registry. So then basically anything that that user has permission to do, you can also do. Another tool that's very effective is called SMB grind. And SMB grind basically is used in conjunction with LoftCrack on sniffer dumps to make sure that you can remove any duplicate efforts. In other words, what it does is it optimizes LoftCrack to allow it to achieve even faster speeds at cracking these different hashes. While we're talking about SMB tools, we can also look at another hacking tool called SMB Die. And what SMB Die can do is it's basically a proof of concept tool, but again, by using SMB, it can actually send a specially crafted SMB packet to a system and cause that system to crash. Now you're thinking, well, how does that really help me with authenticating? By sending this SMB packet to that machine and causing it to crash, naturally the next thing they're going to try to do is reboot and then re-authenticate with the network. And when they re-authenticate with the network is when I can be ready to gather that information and then use that later to crack their account. So some of the weaknesses with SMB relay and some of the countermeasures that you can use to stop SMB relay, well, the weaknesses is that the problem is to convince the victim's client to authenticate to my server. In other words, I have to make them authenticate with me. Now, I can do this through an email message or something else. However, email messages and email clients are getting very good at stopping attachments, particularly attachments that have links and so on. So I have to be careful in how I craft that email message. Now, something else I can do on the system, which we'll talk about later, is I can do ARP poisoning. ARP poisoning is basically where I poison his information. In other words, when he requests a particular resource, he knows to go to a particular address. If I corrupt that table of addresses, then he requests his resource and actually will come to me. So if I can do that, that will force him to also come and authenticate with me. So maybe I can't trick him into clicking on a link, but I can go ahead and poison his system to force him to come to me. So how can I go ahead and do countermeasures as a system administrator against these kinds of SMB attacks? Well, the first thing is I can configure Windows 2000 to use SMB signing. And if I use SMB signing, that assures that my communication is only from this client to this client. And that makes sure that each client and server ensures that that SMB packet or the SMB information came from them itself. In addition to that, I can also use different forms of cryptography to sign each SMB that I send across the line. In addition, I can also put different security policies or group policies in place that make sure that this cryptography or this signing is in place regardless of what the settings at the client are.